My mother is a Lutheran and my father's Southern Baptist. If you don't know about Christianity, you're talking about like two completely opposite ends of the Christian spectrum. Anytime I was in a church, I felt more of a spectator. If you're not on truth, then what are you on? So our only choices are batila and delusion. You get one life.
The uniqueness of your experience as a revert is you didn't just accept Islam and go about living your life. You decided to give it your life.
Worship means obey.
The 5 pillars are what we all think ibadah means. And besides that, all the other stuff is for shayukh. My ways are horrible.
SubhanAllah.
I'm going to start following Allah's ways, and I'm going to start following the ways of our Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. The backlash that I felt from that was unlike any other. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode here at The Lost Message. Brothers and sisters, today we have a very special guest with us, a very renowned figure here in the Chicago area, a very passionate speaker, Sheikh Khalid Herrington.
MashaAllah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Barakallahu feek. Jazakallah khairan jazaa for having me on the podcast. MashaAllah, it's an honor and blessing.
Sheikh Khalid, it's honestly a pleasure for us to host you, to have this conversation with you. I'm going to start with the obvious. What made you say yes to my podcast?
Oh, mashallah. You start out with a good question. When you first reached out, and alhamdulillah, by the fadl of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we get a lot of different contacts for, various reasons. You spoke with our brother Muhammad Ali, who handles all the scheduling and everything. Allah bless him for taking on that enormous responsibility. But he just gave me a brief background that you had given him and said, mashallah, let's have the brother come into the office and let's sit down and talk with him and find out what he's about. Then the first time you came in, I had a situation at home, so I had to immediately leave. We didn't get a chance to sit down and talk. So I was a little qadarullah, right? But I actually wanted to sit down with you at that time because I saw the way that you were paying attention to the program that we were doing that evening. All right, it was like, this guy is focused, like he's locked in. So you came back the next week, and then we had an opportunity to actually sit down and speak after the program. And then I heard a reverberation, if you will, of what a lot of young people are experiencing and going through, and the challenges. And I could see you yourself were very passionate about just trying to do the right thing, but also at the same time, for lack of a better word, hurt, right? just genuinely hurt, which is a natural human response, right? I've been there, and that's the reason why I could recognize it. So then when you explain the point and purpose of the podcast, it's like, mashallah, this is right in line with what we're doing. And again, that evening and this evening and everything, we know we have challenges, all right? But we have to figure out how we're going to present a positive message and positive solutions and get focused on those. And I generally believe that's what you want to do, long term. So, mashallah. Like I was saying before, we're all in this together. So it's not my effort and your effort. I see them as one and the same.
Sheikh, Jazakallah khairan. It's honestly an honor for me to be having this conversation with you, being a nobody, almost, coming from this background where I'm still starting my journey. I want to say I've been on it for a couple of years, but starting my journey. Trying to learn and spread the message as much as I can. Again, I always make it very clear to whoever I'm speaking to, I'm not a scholar, nor do I want to act like one, but nevertheless, you are a scholar. And I'd like to kind of deep dive into what brought you to Islam. And this might be something that you've talked about over and over.
A perennial question.
Yeah. So what brought you to Islam to a point where you decided to study Islam and make it your, source of just life?
I think you're probably going to get a unique answer here. Okay. A more mature answer than say I would have given 15, 20, 25, or 30 years ago, when everything first happened. It wasn't a moment. Like people always want to know, like thinking that there was like somebody introduced you to Islam, and then like you started reading Quran, and then you took your Shahada in the Masjid, and like, but actually, and I think this may be true for everybody, yourself included, there was a process that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took me through personally. There are certain things that I could point to in my childhood. And then as I was growing up, and I can tell you, like in hindsight, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was taking me through a process, getting me ready, protecting me from certain things, having me to experience certain things, both positive and negative. And then when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from a new Muslim, he didn't know anything. MashaAllah, may Allah ta'ala bless him, Alfonso Cleaver.
How long ago?
This is in Ramadan of 1995.
1995.
Yes.
Oh wow.
Don't make me feel old.
No.
It's okay. I'm just messing with you.
30 years. Almost 30 years.
In ours, well, I generally don't even function. So I go by our calendar. So the Hijri calendar.
Right.
So every 36 years, you're going to get a year anyway. So my 30 years are already up, just like, mashallah, I'm supposed to turn 49 this month, but actually I'm already 50. All right?
Mashallah.
No sense hiding from the truth or reality. I'm happy with whatever he wants. If he wants me to be here, mashallah, I'm ready to stay. If it's time to go, I'm ready to go. I honestly do not want to even stay here any longer than I have to.
It's a big thing to say because we aren't there to say it yet.
Yeah, it is a blessing, mashallah. But again, this is exactly what the original question, right? It's a continuation of that process. It didn't start from the time I became Muslim. It started from the time I was a child. There's any number of events. We don't eat up your whole podcast, like just going over, my personal history, the backstory, as they say.
Some highlights, maybe.
For instance, education-wise, I was born in Stuttgart, Germany. Both my parents were in the military. So both of them were doing tours of duty in Europe at the time. And then that's how my parents met, right? And that's where I came about. And then we ended up doing actually three tours of duty in Europe. My sister was born in DC. So we moved around. So again, like starting out kind of like with international exposure. And then in military schools, it's different than a public school. So for me, what happened was, and Allah Ta'ala did all of this. So for me, what happened was like they go through like this rigorous testing of children, like right from the very beginning. And then if they determine that you have above aptitude, a certain degree of aptitude, they separate you. So my class size, going through like elementary school and everything, was 7 to like 10 kids in a class. And I was always with those, like that small group. And so by the time I was in third grade, like we were already doing like biology, dissecting frogs and all of that stuff, right? Like I think by fourth grade, I think is what it was. I was already in engineering competitions. We were doing, learning about load bearing, right? And actually building bridges and structures out of balsa wood and whatnot, right? And then going to competitions but this is how I spent my childhood.
And this is outside the country, or this is still in Chicago, in the U.S.?
This is in the U.S.
Okay.
Right. And then my initial education was not on par with like, what the average, citizen, U.S. citizen would receive in like public schools or in some degrees, even in private schools. I got a specialized, the teacher was a special teacher. MashaAllah, just being with a group of students, a small group of students, developing those relationships with that small group of students, engaging in all of those educational activities together. And then also like, they're very bright. Like each one of those, like MashaAllah, was like a shining star. So like you also get that impact and that influence while also being kind of defended, if you will, right? From like, like mindset and even to a certain degree childishness.
Yep.
Like we were taught, to be more mature in the way that you think, in the way that you carry yourself, and so on and so forth. But Allah Ta'ala did that. Allah made sure that that happened. I never felt comfortable in a church, ever.
And you did go to church?
I did. Like my mother is a Lutheran. Okay. And my father, Southern Baptist. Like if you don't know about Christianity, you're talking about like two completely opposite ends of the Christian spectrum.
Okay.
So I got I got the quote unquote the white church experience and the black church experience. Very different. Okay. But never felt comfortable. Anytime I was in a church, I felt more of a spectator. Like I was just more an observer more than anything else. Pork, not a big fan, just never was. In black families, and this has, there's a history behind this, but a lot of black families will like consume a lot of pork. I could the smell itself would make me nauseous. The smell itself would make me not. Who does that? It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now when I'm finally introduced to Islam, I can honestly say, because it was just, technically, it was only 8 verses of the Quran, and that was it. I had already been looking and searching. I mashallah, at that time, I was very heavily into martial arts. So again, discipline. So like the military lifestyle, then also organized sports and martial arts. So Allah Ta'ala is always injecting this understanding of working as a unit, right? But also be a thinker, question, but have a value for discipline, have a value for having structure, having a framework. So, mashallah. So when I was presented with Islam, this new Muslim, he didn't know anything. Subhanallah. He was asking me questions about Christianity, but I was like, there's no point in that. I already have my own questions that have gone unanswered. I've already been viewed as a heretic or what have you, right? For asking certain questions and kind of demanding clarification. So, but he's like, look, I'm new. I can't tell you anything. But all the answers that you want are actually in this Quran. So he said, but you have to be clean before you can touch it. He didn't even know how to make wudu. He didn't know how to even he took his shahada, we walked him through it, ashhadu, right? He couldn't even recite the shahada. He did it that one time, and so he's brand new.
And he was the one who introduced him.
And he was the one. So, and the only thing he told me was you have to wash your hands. And then this is my Quran. He had it wrapped in a pillowcase, and he says that you're more than welcome. Wash your hands first, and you can read it whenever you want to.
And it was in English.
And it was the Pickthall translation, with the big blue ones, back from the 90s, mashallah. And subhanallah, it was during Ramadan. He was fasting. So I had started fasting with him, and it was what I know now is tahajjud time. So it was 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I grabbed his mushaf and opened it up. And those first 7 verses articulated everything that I was feeling. I couldn't figure out how to, and it was so concise. It was mind-blowingly beautiful, amazing. It was it's just right there in front of you.
Which surah are we talking about?
Al-Fatiha.
Fatiha, okay, mashallah.
So then I turned the page, because now you got me now, right? I turned the page. ALM, I have no idea. Okay, fine, let's keep it moving. And then we get to Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. And so this book, right, without any doubt whatsoever, is guidance for those who, it said fear God. I know now more it's more that as a result, but it's being conscious of truth and reality, right? But fear, I never had any doubt about the existence of God, ever. Religions, yes. God, no.
Have you completed college by this time? Are you in college? Are you done?
I'm 19 years old.
Okay, so you're high school.
I just graduated from high school. I'm young. I'm a kid.
Right.
I am very much a kid. I was done. That was it. I shut the Quran, and I was 100% I'm Muslim now.
Mashallah.
As if a light switch, I have no questions anymore. Now, only thing that was left is I was right from that moment, I found it. I found the truth. It's all about this now. My whole life is all about this now. Nothing else. So
Just
now,
in that moment.
in that moment. And that's the way it's been from day one. So when you're asking, like, when do you decide like to study, like from that moment? Because once you find the truth, how do you not want to know about the truth? Once you find reality, how do you not want to be in touch with reality? Because what's the alternative? If you're not on truth, then what are you on? And if you're not in touch with reality, then what are you in touch with? So our only choices are basically batila, right? And delusion. And you get one life. That's it. You get one shot at this. So now that I found the truth, it's all about that. And now the hard part, right? Conformity. So that's what this past like 30 years has been about, is education, and then trying to apply everything that I am learning, and making a lot of mistakes along the way.
How did your family take it? Did you tell them right away?
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Like I said, I was young, extremely naive. I was still under the impression that everybody wanted the truth, right? They just couldn't find it. And then again, my educational process was in full swing. So with friends, family members, etc., you learn real fast that like some people are completely comfortable with the familiarity of the delusion. It's familiar. It's what they know. It's what's comfortable to them. It's what's convenient for them. And when I encountered that, like that was an eye-opening experience. Some of that naivete became a casualty, right? Some of that initial innocence, if you will, became an immediate casualty, because like you realize that, mashallah, people still care for you. They still love you. But this thing is not about you. This is something that is happening between them and their creator. And even though you may present the truth to people, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to be in a position capable because of their whatever's going on between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of actually being able to be receptive and receive that truth and engage in that process of now compliance and conformity. So you have to accept that.
The uniqueness of your experience as a revert is you didn't just accept Islam and go about living your life. You decided to give it your life, and you pursued it instead of just going to college. Or did you go to college?
Yeah, for me, like, education and whatnot and jobs and everything were all about like, okay, I need to fuel this. So it was always about like, how can I fuel this? I need to study, right? I have to take care of my family. 95, I became Muslim. By 97, March of 97, I'm married. By January of 98, I have my first child. By April of 99, I have my second child. By August of 2000, I have my third child. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
So,
but you're very young. Was it common for your circle to be that young with kids and married? You're still early 20s, right?
Yeah, like this is like one of those things, like the difference between what you will commonly find in Muslim communities here in the U.S. I did not find this when I went overseas. I really only found this here. Right? There's a certain mentality in the Muslim community, that pervasive mentality in the Muslim community here, where it's all about like you have to have money, status,
settle
position,
down,
and right before you can get married. That is not an American thing, at least not back in like I mean, you have to remember, like my grandmother's and my grandfather's generation, it was not uncommon for people to get married at 13, 14, 15, 16 years old and start having kids.
Really?
Yeah. So this
here in America.
Here in the US.
We would have never known that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then so for us, like somebody getting married in their 20s was absolutely commonplace. Now necessarily like 21, like, because I had just turned 21 years old, right? Yeah, there's still there those were out there, right? It's like a 50-50 kind of thing.
Right. There's always those cases.
Yeah. So but usually by the time like 25, 26, like, yeah, pretty much like whoever was planning on getting married got married by that time. The notion of getting married in your 30s or your 40s, that was usually like thought of late bloomers, or they had already been married and divorced. okay, or that they were so career oriented,
Right.
right, that they put their career in front of family and
Yeah.
having a family. So I mean, it was a different mindset back then. So for me, like jobs, and there was so much barakah in that. There was so much barakah. I didn't want to do, because I actually started college when I was in high school. So I was taking AP courses, right? So advanced placement. So you
Right.
get your college credit, for taking those classes while you're in high school. But by the time I became Muslim, I had really, I don't want to say lost all faith, but I had noticed some extremely serious issues in the academic institution in this country, and the way that they proceed with the actual epistemology itself, right, in Western academia. And then I had so many, racial experiences and come across, racial bias so often that, obviously this is not just about education. There's so much more at play here. And again, like I was taught from a younger age, right, that to think in terms of equations as opposed to like simple black and white, this or that. So like you look at and you try to find all the variables. You're trying to find like all the details here that are at play in the equation. So for me, it's like I can't see spending like, the next, 6 years, 8 years of my life pursuing an education that may or may not benefit me. And then on top of that, I'm going to have to experience certain things which are definitely going to be problematic, right? And potentially can have a psychological impact upon you if you are exposed to it over a lengthy period of time. So again, I'm staying focused on Deen. So subhanAllah, I ended up working at GE
Okay.
in the engineering department.
Is this in Chicago?
No, actually this was in Louisville, Kentucky. It was really an amazing experience. Like it was my first time like kind of like going into that, engineering world, corporate world type of setting as a Muslim and not knowing what to expect. And again, this is the 90s.
Right.
Right? Pre 9/11, which is, it's a major turning point.
Right.
I was received so well by non-Muslims. And I'm scraggly beard. I'm young, right? Scraggly beard, I got my topi on and everything. And right. I have to pray, and I got my sajada, my prayer rug, my jandamas, and yeah. And I got my own office, and like these guys would, they would remind me, like if we're running a test or something, like before we start this test, you want to go pray? I know it's your prayer time, right? If we're doing something, like you got to pray pretty soon, don't you?
Yeah.
Right. I make my door during lunchtime. These guys would like be like guards at my door. Somebody like comes wanting something, knocking on my door. Like they would like, I'd hear him outside the office. Stop, he's in there praying. Leave him alone. Don't bother him. Right. And this is Kentucky.
Right.
So these are middle-aged, white, Republican, gun-owning, right? Americans. And I received nothing but consideration from all of those guys.
So you think it's because the image of Islam back then wasn't corrupted, wasn't presented to them as a negative thing? It was kind of like, yeah, it's a religion. He's chosen to follow it. That's it. Respect it.
You have to remember, this is after the first Iraq war.
From the early 90s. Yeah. Okay.
Right?
So,
and then also during this time, you have what's taking place in Bosnia. You have that whole conflict that's taking on as well during that time. So Islam is still very much in the news.
Okay.
It's still very much in the news. But what I have found over the years with non-Muslims, not so much today, it's getting a little hairy out there. But for the most part, people will give you a chance to present yourself. So like they like, okay, fine, you say you're Muslim. Okay. But let's see what kind of person you are.
Right.
Right. And then once they find out what kind of person you are, if you like, you pass muster, then they're good with you. One of those guys, he gave me one of the, you want to call it a compliment, but he gave me one of the best, like most touching compliments I think I've ever received. And he's retired military. And he told me, he said, I'd share a foxhole with you any day. Like if anything ever happens.
Trust.
Yes. He's like, you could bring your family. I would take care of your family. And I would trust that you would take care of my family. So like if anything ever happens, like, no, you can always like come to my home.
Right.
right? I know that mentality coming from a military family. What he said was a big deal. What he said was a really, really big deal. And he was emotional when he said it. And that's when one of the times when I actually got to see, like, it was an opportunity to see how Islam, if we practice it, how it can have such a profound impact on the lives of the people around us. Because I didn't do anything special. I even still, right now, I'm looking back right now trying to think, did I do something? I can't put my finger on any one thing. I went to work and I just tried to conduct myself as a Muslim. And that's all I did. And like do my work to the best of my ability. That was it. If I have bad akhlaq, bad character, or if I'm not practicing my Islam properly, then I'm also going to be responsible for having that negative impact.
Right.
Right. And then for me, I'm looking at it like, you're here, fine. Like, what's next? So I'm also thinking, like, I could have had a bigger impact if I would have been practicing more. If I would have been a better Muslim, like maybe he would have taken a Shahada. Allah knows best.
So you're working a GE, first time into the corporate world, married, kids. Have you started your journey towards Islamic education at this point, or are you still doing a lot of self-study?
Okay. My understanding of Islamic education has gone through so many changes over the years. And alhamdulillah, I think that the final result is in. The general understanding of Islamic education, as it is generally understood in the Muslim community, is inadequate. It is inadequate.
Yep.
The reason being is that we're thinking that Islamic education just means like I sit in a classroom, I'm signing up for some class, I register, right? There's a syllabus and I'm going to sit down. I'm going to take these courses and I'm going to take the exams, receive a final grade. There'll be some form of certification or graduation process at the end. And all of that is a portion of it, but it's just a portion. True Islamic education, like, go back to the roots. How did the Sahaba learn?
Practical.
So as far as like when you're talking about like what university, Islamic university did they graduate from? Where they graduate from? But yet in terms of like their depth of knowledge and understanding and practice, etc., it is unparalleled. Like they are like, mashallah, they are the top of the mountain. Radiyallahu anhum. But there was no university. There was no syllabus. There was no classroom. There were no exams. It was about life. Learning your Deen while you're living life. And that for me, again, take it all the way back to my childhood. Then like it changed as soon as I became Muslim. Then I went through a learning experience actually leading up to the formal education. So that was all, and all of it was beneficial. I can tell you, Allahu Akbar, sitting and going through the formal classes and everything in my 30s, I can tell you that the way that the Ullama Asatidha, the way they interacted with me was different than my classmates that were all like in their, late teens, early 20s. They had no life experience. They were still living at home with their parents. I've already like education, work, wife, kids, living on my own. Like, so your viewpoint, your perspective as you're going through your studies is not one just of concepts.
Right.
Right. It's you're immediately, so you're learning certain concepts, but then you get to retrospectively apply those. Oh, this is why this happened. This is what Allah was teaching me. This explains this and this explains that. Oh, I've already been through this. I know that's true. I've been through that. So your educational experience is completely different. Completely different. So then when I finished that formal education in 2012 at IIE, I was also at that time doubling up because I was at Dar Qasim as well with Sheikh Amin. And then when I finished at IE, I just continued on and still continue on to this day at Dar Qasim because again, it doesn't ever end. But what is the focus now? The focus is practical application. Amal ala al-ilm. Action upon the knowledge. That is always supposed to be the focus. And when I heard about how Abu Bakr Siddiq radiyallahu anhu, how he memorized Quran, ashra. So he would take 10 ayat, memorize them, learn the meaning, put it into practice before he would move on to the next 10. This was his understanding of Hifdh al-Quran. So it's not just about like the outer appearance or just taking the shell, if you will. You want the lub, you want the kernel inside. And the only way that you can actually get to the kernel inside, because like if I ask you a question, what's it about? Fine, Islamic education, for what? What's it for?
Yeah.
So that like I can say I'm an Imam, a scholar, an Alim. So people call me Sheikh or Maulana. So I can argue with Juhala, with the ignorant masses, right? Like, what is it for? Is it so I can do this, right? YouTube and social media and Patreon. Like, what is it for? Is it for the community? No. I'm dying. That's what it's for. I'm dying, and I have one opportunity, just one, to get this right, knowing that I'm making mistakes all the time. So the focus as far as like, what is knowledge actually supposed to be for? That knowledge is supposed to bring us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through its inculcation, through its practical application. Then as we go through that process of application, it also has a term associated with it, ma'arifa. Ma'arifa is experiential knowledge. It is through this experiential knowledge that you actually learn who you are and who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And then that's when this relationship truly like begins to not develop, but at that point, blossom, right? And now you begin, like, this is where you can understand what the ayah means, right? So now, مَا خَلَقَتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, that I have not created the jinn kind and mankind except for my ibadah. And we say like it was for worship. What does worship mean? Nobody knows. Like I ask people this all the time.
The 5 pillars.
Worship means obey.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Obey. Well, some people stop there. Ibn Abbas, the mufassir of the Ummah, he says the tafsir of إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ is إِلَّا لِيَعْرِفُونَ. They should get to know who I am. يَعْرِفُونَ, right? So now you have Ain, Ra, Fa. Ma'arifa. It's there. So the whole point of the obedience, all the restrictions and all the prohibitions and the mandates and directives, you have to do this and you can't do that, that framework that we know as Sharia, right, the ahkam of Sharia, that framework is actually meant as a protective and productive mechanism. Okay, so it protects us from harms, and at the same time, it gives us what we need to propel us forward. You just have to engage in the process. You don't even have to understand it. Just do it. You don't need all the details. Just do it. And then through that process, ma'arifa takes place. And from that relationship that develops with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from Allah's side being the Rabb, Rububiyyah, and from the side of the creation, me and you, right, the Ubudiyyah, or being the Abd of Allah. So what does it mean to be for Allah ta'ala to be the Rabb? What does it mean for me to be the Abd? What does that relationship consist of? Why does that relationship exist? It all comes down to one word, love. The whole point of Islam is so that you can get to know the creator of the universe, so that you can learn how to love him properly.
When you describe ibadah like that, why are we so far away from that definition of ibadah? Why have we limited our understanding of ibadah to going to the masjid, praying 5 times a day, which is a big deal now, right? The ones that do it are literally hanging on it as if that's the only thing that they need to do to be a Muslim, and the rest is good. But that disconnection where the framework, the way you described it, that needs to be applied to me through life, that mindset is missing. And I might be speaking from my limited experience, but you know more, you've seen more. When you walked into this kind of a lifestyle, right? Where did you see the gaps between the regular Muslim out there, who potentially was just born into a Muslim family like myself, never really went through any kind of formal education. I do what my dad says, I do what my mom says, or, as I grow up, I kind of see the community and the culture, and I'm a reaction to whatever that happens. But the framework is completely out of the picture. The 5 pillars are what we all think ibadah means. And besides that, all the other stuff is for shayukh. It's for someone like yourself. not for someone like me, who's the regular guy who goes to college, gets a job. How did we get here?
The Quran and Hadith of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam are absolute truth. So this process, like without even like focusing on any specific Hadith, but just taking the body of work from the Hadith that kind of like denotes and delineates for us, you know, these things, these events are going to happen leading up to Yawm al-Qiyamah. And one of those things that is very clear and undeniable is the process of erosion. It is something that has happened over and over again in human history, right? This is the reason why the prophets are sent over and over and over again, and people keep falling into the same traps, because we're dealing with the self, nafs, right, in relation to hayat ad-dunya, in relation to this life, right? That attachment that the nafs has to this worldly life, right? So that attachment, and a lot of it has to do with sensory perception, is a whole nother discussion for another time. It's this is where that process of erosion comes from. Then we have all of these, external influences into our cognitive framework, family and culture and education and current events and our friends and what country we were born in and all of these, variables that exist for each and every one of us. So what happens? Cognitive dissonance. That's what happens. So what happens is that we are professing to believe one thing, but at the same time, in terms of like our lifestyle, we want a lifestyle that is actually contradictory to our belief. And then that's where the tension exists. So a lot of what we experience today in the Muslim community is because of individuals trying to figure out how to deal with that internal tension. Unfortunately, because it's easy for all of us to fall into that trap, and to whatever degree we are currently in the trap ourselves, right? It's a matter of degrees. It's not an on-off switch. Everybody wants to basically do what they want to do, live how they want to live. But at the same time, they still want to be Muslim. They don't want to be detached from Islam. And that's where you see, like, for instance, praying 5 times, and may Allah Ta'ala accept. This is dangerous times. And like the fact that people are like praying 5 times a day, like in this environment, is a miracle from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. It is a miracle. Now the problem, so the real challenge is not that. The real challenge is that when those same individuals now believe that they do have a thorough, accurate, complete understanding of Deen, that their way of thinking, their mentality is correct in totality. And then this is where everything becomes extremely problematic, because now we're dealing with the misrepresentation of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the misrepresentation of al-Islam. And then that's really where we have the big problems at.
I want Islam to be what I feel like it is, right? And the prayer is amazing because I've got that covered. My heart feels at ease with salah, as it should. But there's so much more that I don't want to look at. And I've almost, the idea of the rahmah of Allah, which is so, I don't want to use the word misrepresented, but I want to say that, could I say misrepresent? Okay, in your presence, there you go. Yeah. So the idea of rahmah is misrepresented almost.
Because he's also Sari'ul Iqab. Allah Ta'ala is also quick, like in terms of retribution.
Right.
So like the Asma of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, you'll when you look at them, there's balance. So our understanding of them must also be with that balance that Allah Ta'ala presents to us. You just can't take one side, right? Opportunistically, so to speak, right?
Right.
You can't just take one side and then forget that the other side of the flip side of that coin exists.
So how do we address that gap? Because the issue that I have faced is people that have been connected to the masjid more than I ever have. People that are very social with the masjid, in the masjid, more than I ever have been, are the ones that have this subjective understanding of Allah's rahmah, almost convinced that they're not going to burn in hell. And all those ayahs about hellfire are just there to scare us. Like, Allah is so merciful, that's never going to happen. Like, that's not going to happen with me. Like, the literal translation of that doesn't sit well with them in their heart.
Yeah, I can tell you the first problem where, like, because there's a detachment from the Quran itself. Because everything that you're describing is actually already in the Quran. Like, people have already said these things, thought these things, like, and actually it's Banu Israel that you're describing.
Surah Baqarah.
Right? Yeah. So it's there. So, like, the fire is never going to touch us except for, you know, a number of days, or like blah, blah, blah. And it's like, subhanAllah. It's that same, again, these are human tendencies. If you don't battle with your Islam to contradict these tendencies, right, to kind of like stave off these inclinations, these human inclinations that we have, then you're going to fall prey to them. And when we don't read Quran, then yeah, because again, Allah Ta'ala is not giving history lessons. He's not telling us stories for bedtime.
Right.
He's telling us because, like, if you're not careful, this is what you're going to do. This is what's going to happen. And don't say that you weren't warned. But the other thing, like, you mentioned something, and you know, they pray 5 times in the masjid and they socialize in the masjid. When did Islam become about the masjid, the building itself? That is like one of my biggest, like, you ask, you know, like the things that I've encountered. That's probably like the biggest thing that, like, is really problematic for me, is that it's not about people anymore. It's about buildings.
Right.
And because of that, there's a certain demographic, if you will, right, that will tend to, you know, function in these places, control these places, and set a standard as far as like what is acceptable or unacceptable in these places. So
we hear this a lot. Connect your heart to the masjid. Right? Oh, we hear this so much in these in the khutbahs. And
let's define masjid though.
Okay.
Okay. Because, like, you notice I didn't use that term as much as, like, I said the building.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So what is a masjid supposed to be? So when we're talking about masjid, so when I'm using the term masjid, this is what I, you know, want it to mean. So I'm going to the masjid, for instance. You know, I'm leaving the house, I'm telling the family I'm going to the masjid for salat. I don't want them to think of the building where he goes and, like, this is where they pray. I want him to, like, the understanding of a masjid, like, this is a center of dhikr. Like, this is that safe haven, this is that refuge, that sanctuary that you're supposed to be able to go to like where you walk through those doors and the dunya can't come in. You can leave your problems and everything, like, at the door. And when you go in here, it should just be focused on the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's it. So there may be people, like, that are reading Quran, there may be people that are doing dhikr, people that are making salat, people that are teaching, right? But you don't have to worry about backbiting there. What do we say as soon as we walk into the masjid? Assalamu alaikum. What is the whole point of saying assalamu alaikum? المسلمون قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم المسلم من سلم المسلمون من لسانه ويده أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. The Muslim is the one that other Muslims are safe from what? From his actions and from his tongue. So I'm supposed to be safe. When I say to another Muslim, assalamu alaikum, I'm telling him, I am not going to hurt you. I'm letting you know. I'm making dua for you. And I'm letting you know that I'm not going to hurt you with my hand, my actions, or with my tongue, with my words. That is the right of a Muslim. That's the reason why we give people salams. But do we feel that level of safety? Right? Do we feel that level of safety in our masajid that you're not going to be unduly judged or criticized, or you're not going to have to deal with the backbiting or the slander, right? Or political opinions and this and that and the other. Meaning, like, is the dunya kept outside of the doors? Is all of our issues, like, kept outside of the hospital, so to speak? Because that's the way that it's supposed to be. The masjid is supposed to be the center of nur in the community, the center of dhikr in the community, that refuge, that hospital, that clinic that exists within the community that all of us stay attached to, because that's where we go to get healthy. That's a masjid. It's an environment of taqwa. That's the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, right? He told Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, they built a masjid. They had a different agenda other than taqwa. Allah ta'ala told the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, La tuqum fihi abada. Don't ever stand in it. Why? Because a masjid that is founded, it is based on taqwa, has more of a right. So Allah Ta'ala is telling us, like, look, building what you call a masjid, having a structure and saying that it's a masjid, that's one thing. But it's got to be based on taqwa. if it's not based on taqwa, and if we're not finding the teachings of Islam inside of that structure of dhikr, right? Inside of that building, that's extremely problematic. And this is the reason why we find that converts don't feel comfortable and welcome in that environment. So they go once or twice. The hardy ones, mashallah, they might survive for a few months trying to engage in the community and get, right? And then like they experience what they experience, right? And then they fall back. Youth, same thing. They go, they have negative experiences, and then same thing. I don't want to deal with that. And they fall back. Then we have young people, or actually not young people, various ages. They've come to that place where they're like, you know what? My way is horrible. I want to try Allah's way. I want to try the way of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And I'm like, that's what I want to adhere to. That's what I want to stick to. Let me go to the masjid. And then they encounter like the same type of negativity. Like the things that are not supposed to be there are there, and the things that are supposed to be there are not there. So again, they fall back. And then those people are asking like, well, we want the converts to come, and we want the youth to come to the masjid. And they think the solution is what? Basketball and pizza, right? Yeah. When actually it's like, no, beloved, we need a masjid. We need a center of nur. We need a center of taqwa. We need a place that is completely, absolutely focused on the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a masjid. Everything else is buildings and structures. That potentially there's some khair that's in it, like mashallah, like some of those things are there. Again, it's not a matter of it's a complete like, you know, like we need to abandon all of our existing masjids and like they're horrible and no, there's a lot of khair, there's a lot of good that comes out of those places. We're just saying that like there's a lot of work to be done still. There's a lot of repairs, there's a lot of things that need to be brought into balance, back into alignment in order for those places to become what they should be, right? So that way people will not just want to go, they'll feel attracted. And those who do come, they won't want to leave. That's the challenge, inshallah.
And what should be the attraction in these masjids? Because typically it's the khutbahs that we come for, Jummah, for the ones that aren't able to come daily for whatever reason. We come at least on Fridays and we hear the khutbah. And then there's community events sometimes that are held, which attracts a crowd depending on what's going on, who's the speaker, what are the topics. The teaching of Deen, the teaching of the lifestyle. My short experience might have to do with this, or my lack of paying attention ever in the past several years, but I never heard real life implementations that I got from a masjid. Which is why when I started practicing Islam and when I started realizing that, okay, this got to stop. These are the things that I got to start doing. The things that had to stop were much bigger as far as backlash I received than I assumed I should have, because you guys have been going to the masjid longer than I have. Have you never heard this in the masjid? Right? Like that was my mind. It's like, how come you're so surprised that I'm doing this when I told you I'm about to follow the Deen? You've been in more khutbahs than I have. You never heard this before. And I, believe it or not, I got answers saying, well, it doesn't need to be like that. And I'm surprised because nothing extreme I'm doing. Nothing extreme. I'm going on a rampage right now, but I want to complete a quick thought. There's a few things that I decided, right? When I started practicing Islam, and it was the same reason as you said, my ways are horrible.
SubhanAllah.
I'm going to start following Allah's ways, and I'm going to start following the ways of our Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And that's what I'm going to do, because my ways are no good. So when I started learning of Allah's ways and the ways of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I'm thinking, the bigger sacrifice I have is, man, I can't get a new car on that loan. I can't get that Mercedes, or I can't get that, Range Rover or whatever, because obviously I gotta pull out a loan on that. I got interest, and these are the things that I'm sort of hung up on. And I'm like, okay, this is a tough one, because the house we sit in, unfortunately, it's a mortgaged house. And I did it before really taking some strong decisions in my life. So I'm thinking I have to pay off this house. I've got to restrict some of my expenses and kind of hold my hand. And I got to do so I'm focused on these things. But then when I have a small gathering in my house, and when I say small, we're talking 70, 80 people,
Lord.
right? So I have a little gathering, and all I do is I put up a couple shutters. You see these shutters, right? These are the kind of shutters that were kind of outlined at the entrance for the men to kind of just make their way downstairs, and the women can stay upstairs. And the backlash that I felt from that was unlike any other. And here I'm thinking the other problems are bigger ones to deal with, but this was the basic social norm that I felt. I mean, really, what's the big deal? Like, you guys go to masjids. You don't fight about being together in a masjid. Like, this is 70, 80 people. It's not even just your immediate, there's a lot of other people that you might not know in this gathering.
It's a secular mind.
These are people from the masjid. So what do we say?
It's a matter of substance. Whether we like it or not, people are the attraction. Personalities are the attraction. Like, it was the character of Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. It wasn't the masjid that attracted the people to Islam, right? Actually, if you look at Masjid al-Nabawi and the description of Masjid al-Nabawi during his time, right? There's nothing that's going to impress the architectural, the Muslim architectural mind or engineering mind of today. There's nothing that's like it is the epitome of simplicity. Okay, so it was not the masjid. It was it was the substance that was in the masjid that was the attraction. It was the personalities, because that's where the substance lays, right? It's in the people. So if you bring the quality people of substance into your masjid, right? And they are actually the ones who are establishing that environment. They're calling the shots to keep that environment, first of all, to establish it, and then to protect it, okay? And then to help it to be able to flourish. It's a different situation. The secular mind, because I grew up with it. Right. So the secular mind says, like, look, you keep your religion and your politics, right, in your places of worship and private. That's it. Okay. Right. That's it. So, like, social, like, you're not supposed to be religious here. Right. Like, you do that in the masjid. You're not supposed to be religious at work. You do that in the masjid or in your private time. So it's a secular mind that you're actually dealing with more than anything else. And then it's the lack of substance. Because even yourself, you're mentioning, like, so as you start embarking upon this journey, you're thinking that I have to tackle all these external issues, when actually it's about, like, tackling the internal issues, and the internal issues will give you a light that will guide you as far as, like, how to deal with the external issues. So most of the time, when somebody wants to go through a kind of process of reformation, they don't understand that it is a process, a pre-existing process. That reformation process, that process of islah and irshad, is something that has been, like, mashallah, there are templates, existing templates, modes and methodologies that are already proven to be successful. But again, because we're not aware of it, we haven't been exposed to it. So we're thinking, like, am I on this on my own, like, to figure this out? But this is where shuyukh are supposed to come in. These kind of, like, spiritual masters. This is what we were talking about before. Yeah. One thing is understanding, having a depth of understanding in the Deen. Another thing is understanding the context and then being able to apply Islam within that context. One of it is a collective, and then also being able to advise people on how to manage their own unique individual experience that they're having with their Islam. Mm-hmm. But it starts internally. If you think about it, in Mecca, 13 years. 10 years in Medina, 13 years in Mecca. The ahkam happen where? Not in Mecca, in Medina. We don't even get Ramadan until the second year after Hijrah. We don't get zakat until the second year after Hijrah. So out of those 5 pillars, 15 years, there was only 2. And Salah came when? 10th year. Do you see what I mean? Right. So 10 years, 1 pillar, Aqidah. 1 pillar, the whole focus. Look at the ayat that were revealed, the surahs that were revealed during that time. Aqidah, Aqidah, Aqidah. You have to, like, get everything correct in your heart first. That framework, internal framework, has to be constructed, right? And then it has to be, like, that foundation has to be laid down, and then you have to begin that construction process on that internal foundation based on Aqidah and Akhlaq. 10 years in, now you're ready for Salah, the obligation of Salah. Then it takes another 5 years with that magnificent, powerful tool in play. Now you're ready for law and order. Now you're ready for rules and regulations. And this is the biggest challenge that I have with new Muslims also. Oh my gosh, do you know how many times I've heard over the years, the only thing that was stopping people from taking their shahada is they were like, I need to be a good person first. Like, I need to stop drinking. I need to stop eating pork. I need to quit with the girlfriend boyfriend thing. Like I need to do all that first. And it's like, and you should see the relief. Like, it's like you're taking a load off the back of their necks. When you tell them, it's like, no, my beautiful brother, like, that happens afterwards. And that's going to take time. It's Islam that is actually going to help you go through that process, right? Because it's hard. That's the reason why you're having so many problems now. That's the reason why you can't shut this down and shut that off and quit that and stop that and start this, because it's hard. You are not going to be able to do it on your own. You are going to need a methodology. You're going to need a framework to function within. You're going to need help navigating that process. That happens after you become Muslim. Once you enter into the fold of Islam, that's when now we engage that process and begin that slow process of reformation and reform. We're always going to have these people that are Islamically challenged, if you will.
Very polite way of putting it.
Challenged. Okay. We have our own version of it in our time, right? In our era. But it's always been that way. Like I read the classical texts and everything, and big names, big Ullama, in the khutbahs or public speaking engagements and everything. And you're reading and you're like, subhanAllah, he could be like talking to the Muslim community right here, right now. It was 1,000 years ago. And it seems like he's dealing with exactly the same thing that we're dealing. It's just, that was a different version. Really, that's very rare. Like, there may be a variable that changed, like, for instance, the introduction of technology. Okay. Like, that's a new thing. But as far as like people, nothing's new, baby. Nothing's new. Same issues, same problems, same tendencies, predilections, etc., so on and so forth. Same human being. That's the reason why we don't need a new Quran. We don't need another prophet sent, right? We don't it's the same Deen. Like, it's 1,400 years ago. We've changed so much, have we? Attachment and love of the dunya, our selfishness, the bloodshed, the divisions that we are constantly generating, like to divide ourselves and into sects and subsects and subsects within those subsects and so on and so forth. Like, we're always doing this. We're always, like, without Islam and a firm understanding of Islam and the substance of it, right? And getting that substance to become our substance. Basically, what the human being is doing is engaged in a process of self-destruction. It's an implosion process that ultimately it will finish. It'll finish, regardless of all the warnings, regardless of, like, us being the ummah of khairul khalq, right? The best of whole creation. Regardless of the protection that's with the Quran, regardless of the fact that Allah Ta'ala says, "Al-yawma akmaltu lakum deenakum wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati wa raditu lakum al-islam dinan." It's perfect, it's complete. Who says? The only one who can say that. And only the one who is perfect can bring about something that is perfect. So what happens to us then? We have all of that. What happens? We turn our backs to it.
When it comes to the masjids, as we just briefly touched on, and you said it's the character, it's the person personalities that really provide that substance and catch people. It's not the building. So would we say that the khutbahs in general are lacking substance? Is this why the average Muslim walks out and tells his fellow Muslim that, hey, you're an extremist because, you don't need all this covering and all this hijab talk and all this mahram, non-mahram, like, this is too much? Is there a lack of substance in the kind of Islam this person has heard over the years going to the masjid? Or why is he feeling this is the first time?
When you really want to learn, Allah will teach you. It doesn't matter. There's one hadith I haven't checked on but more or less a meaning. Like, even if you're at the top of a mountain, right, and you're sincere in your desire to learn, Allah will send somebody there. It's what do people want? And again, same thing. They crave comfort, convenience, familiarity. They want validation. And anything that challenges that validation is considered to be a threat. And then they will address the threat because they are insecure. So a lot of what you probably even experienced, you're talking about the internet, is because of insecurities. The people themselves are insecure. So when they see somebody actually doing more with the Deen, right, it's again, like you're forcing them to deal with their own personal reality. Why aren't you doing it? And then you're kind of like, so there's an internal conversation. There's an internal dialogue that is being had. And then you're kind of like receiving the brunt of the unfortunate result. Okay. So as far as like khutbahs and things like that, we still have to like keep in mind. I remember when there was maybe a couple of handfuls of ulama in North America, specifically in the US, spread out the country. Like if you had like the phone number of like a mufti, you like to ask a question, it's like you were that guy. He knows a mufti, right? And then in the early 2000s, like around, call it 2005 to 2010, I guess I would be considered part of like the tail end of that also as well. There was this massive influx of young ulama that were returning back from overseas. And this was kind of like really the first time that we had like a growth, right? As far as like the level of education potential, people to take, certain positions of responsibility, etc. But a lot of them were unmentored, unseasoned, inexperienced in life. And like to give you an example, a lot of them came back from overseas to move back in with their parents. That says everything right there, right? So now they're in their 30s and they're trying to like, late 20s, early 30s, and they're like trying to figure out like they're here. They're human beings. They're trying to like, okay, I got to find a wife. I got to find a job. I'm gonna have kids. And so they're literally just starting out life. Now the challenge for them is what? They don't have the experience, but now they're put into these positions of responsibility. And because of their naivete, because of their youth, some of them were even taken advantage of by, older members of the community, like we want you to come and be the Imam, but you're going to do what we tell you to do. Right. Right. And these guys don't know any better. They don't have the experience. There's nobody to stand with them, so to speak. Right. This kind of stuff is unprecedented because they are that first major wave that's coming in. And then on top of that, like there's this added advantage because they're English speakers also. And that was a big challenge like back in the 90s, Right. That's why we had like doctors and this one and that one doing khutbahs, completely unqualified individuals doing khutbahs, completely unqualified.
In the masajid?
Oh, in the masajid. It happened all the time. Oh, wow. All the time. I've been in khutbahs before. I remember the first time it happened where like this person made a statement of kufr from the minbar. And I was like so perplexed. I was so confused. I was like in this like little internal tizzy, what do I do? Like, am I supposed to check this person publicly? Because he just did this publicly. Like, this person's going to try to lead salat now, but like, they kind of like need to renew their shahada. But we're going to do the iqama. Does that like, do I talk to him privately afterwards? Is he even going to listen? I don't even know this guy. Right. Like, it was just, and I was like, this is supposed to be Jumu'ah. And like, as opposed to like coming in and feeling like, mashallah, getting that little boost, a little bit of encouragement and like that refocus on the akhirah, like I'm leaving here like in anxiety. Then I go to another khutbah and something similar happens. And then I get calls from people and they're like, I went to a khutbah today and so-and-so said such and such. And it was like completely, like one thing is like you veered off a little bit. Like, no, you're not even on the right side of the planet. Right. So this was going on all the time. So then we had these young ulama that were coming in, right, in these early 2000s. And now the only thing that they really were capable of doing, because they don't have the experience, is explaining concepts. Right. Okay. And really that's all that management really wanted, because explaining concepts doesn't challenge them. Once you start talking about practical application and how things are supposed to be, and actually like implementation of Deen within this context, now you're challenging certain individuals within that community.
Right.
And those insecurities, again, are going to surface. That need for validation is going to surface. And now they're going to view you as a threat, regardless of if the community loves you or not. They're going to view you as a threat to their power, their authority, right? So now, like, this thing starts to take place between board members and young ulama. And so now we go through this period, this is part of our history, where ulama were kicked around from masjid to masjid to masjid. Like the average at one point in time, I think that a scholar would stay in a position was 8 months to 1 year before, like, you know, there was drama and like, no, you're not going to listen to us. You're not going to do what we tell you. You're not going to play ball. You're out of here.
What would some of those things look like? Like, what are the disagreements about? Is it about like the kind of khutbah you want to give and the kind of message of Islam that you want to spread, or versus what the board is trying to direct you towards, like, hey, keep it soft, keep it warm and fuzzy?
You know, sometimes it happens so frequently, and so many ulama, they're older now, mashallah. I think part of it is because of their inexperience. I think part of it is because of a poor understanding of leadership by people who are in those positions. Leadership in Islam means responsibility. Responsibility means accountability. Accountability means fear. That's the understanding of basic, like, nuts and bolts, X, Y, and Z understanding of leadership in Islam. It's responsibility, which means accountability on Yawm al-Qiyamah, which means be scared. That's what it means.
Right.
Right? So without that understanding being present and the people in those positions.
Right.
So now you have an inexperienced, you know, young guy full of vigor, right? He's got all kinds of energy, wants to do the right thing, wants to be a tool, an implement of change and blah, blah, blah. And mashallah, may Allah bless him. But he doesn't realize that you're going to war with a mentality. You're presenting the mentality of Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. You're presenting the civilizational values of Islam. And that mindset is 180 degrees out of phase with what they, again, that secular mind. And a lot of them didn't understand, like, there's history before this. A lot of the immigrant community, they were exposed to certain things in the countries that they came from, quote unquote, back home. Mm-hmm. Okay. It wasn't that they came here and all of a sudden, like, this stuff just started happening. No. There were things that happened back home, right? Whether it's, you know, because of colonialism or blah, 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 you like, but the point is like, there was an impact. There were these negative influences. It did have an impact. There is history that precedes their coming to America. And then when they come here, it kind of morphs into, you know, what we generally experience or they experienced at that time. And like, we have our own version of it that exists today. Both sides.
Yeah.
There's fault really on both sides.
The misconceptions about fard.
Okay.
I think even me, before I knew much about the Deen, just being a Muslim, I knew that fard is what I'm obligated to do. And these are the mandatory acts of worship that I have to do. And that's fard for me. Whether it's salah, whether it's your fasting, hajj, fard. So as a good Muslim, I'm going to stick to the fard. And that should put me through. I should be good. When I started learning, I realized that the fard, that the things that I used to think are optional, good to have, are actually fard. And I want to also clarify this with you. For some of the things, is it fard for me to stay away from riba? Is that a fard, an obligation?
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Jumu'ah, because we're talking about khutbahs and Jumu'ah, and بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم هو الذي بعث في الأميين ورسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة. And these four, right? And then the ayah finishes, right? So in the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that gives us a list of priorities, mandates, as far as why he sent Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. First thing, recitation of Quran. Okay. Second thing, the process of tazkiyah. Yuzakkihim. This process of tazkiyah, okay, Allah Ta'ala puts it before. It actually comes. Similar ayat come 4 places in the Quran. 3 places, Allah Ta'ala keeps this order. And 1 place in the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam, when him and Ismail alayhi salam, when they finished the construction of the Kaaba and they're making dua, right? Ibrahim alayhi salam, he puts ta'aleem wa ta'allum before tazkiyah. Allah Ta'ala changes that. and puts the order, tilawatul Quran, tazkiyah, and then ta'aleem. This process of purification of the heart. So what are we trying to purify here? All the madhmumat. So blameworthy attributes, characteristics. Our akhlaq has to be polished.
This is part of tazkiyah.
This is tazkiyah. This is fard. This is fard. Okay. So now as you're purifying the heart, what are you getting rid of? The blameworthy attributes, the blameworthy characteristics, and then acquiring the mahmudat. So those praiseworthy attributes, characteristics. What happens is like basically what's taking place. A simple way of explaining it is that our disturbed cognitive framework, very disturbed, a lot of variables. So this one's like in this extreme, that one's in this extreme. This one's just a little out of balance. That one's a little out of balance the other way, right? But out of balance. What Islam does, because like we're human beings, that's our life. Those are our experiences. Those were the influences. Comes and says, this is how you adjust all of those internally to bring them all back into balance. Yes, they did happen. Okay. But how are you going to process it? Using your Islam. So now, as you go through that process of purification, you're also learning how to apply your Deen. As you're learning how to apply your Deen internally, that the new order that comes from that, okay, and that the absence of the murkiness, the cloudiness that comes from that, the disturbance within our cognitive framework, okay, things being out of balance, it leads to wrong understandings. It means that we can't process information correctly because it's kind of like it's going in this side and then it's getting convoluted, it's getting disturbed, it's getting murky, it's getting confused, it's getting distorted in here. And then so like my resulting action is also going to be a reflection of what's in my heart.
And by Deen, do you mean the actual Islam? Lifestyle, okay.
Complete lifestyle.
The framework.
The complete lifestyle, okay? So now when you're dealing with these things, you be amazed. Yes, there's, as far as like the ahkam of Sharia, okay, the understandings are everything are there. I could tell you, like you mentioned interest, riba. I could tell you something about Hanafi fiqh that exists that like it would blow your mind, all right? But the thing about it is that even though it's there, it's Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion. Like it's the ruling, exactly, right?
Yeah.
But where are the minds that are actually capable? Where are the hearts that are actually capable of being able to process it?
Yeah.
Because what do they run into? For instance, they'll run into a cultural distortion. Well, culturally, like blah, 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 right? It's like, well, your culture doesn't override Deen.
Right.
But again, convenience, comfort, familiarity. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
So you got to like those issues, internal issues have to be dealt with first. If we try to learn Deen while we still have this internal corruption, it is going to end up corrupting our understanding of Deen. And this is how you get these extremist groups and whatnot, and this subsect and that little group and postmodernists and neo-reformists and blah, 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 right? That's how it happens. Because it's the same Deen, isn't it?
Right.
So they're reading the same hadith, they're reading the same Quran, so what happened?
Right.
What happened was in here, that the tool that they were using to process the Deen was corrupted, distorted. So then it's kind of like the funhouse mirror type of thing, right? So
right.
the thing itself that's being reflected is sahih, it is correct, it is healthy, it is balanced. But because the distortion that exists within the mirror, the image presented from the mirror is going to be distorted. There's nothing wrong with the original, shay, the original thing that is being reflected. It's the problem is with the mirror. So we have to deal with the mirrors of our heart first. Until we deal with that, and that's the reason why that environment that we were talking about before is so critically important. That's the reason why Allah Ta'ala took them through that process in Mecca of going through a process of purification. Because once these ahkam start coming, you need to be able to process this correctly and you need to be able to act on it. That is the reason why Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she said, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have revealed from the very beginning, like do not commit zina and do not drink alcohol, we would have never have listened.
Right.
Why?
Right.
You're Muslims. You're following Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. You're even being persecuted. And even through all of that, you wouldn't have listened. Why? Because they hadn't gone through that process yet. Then, once they'd gone through that process, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took them through a graduation. Okay. So don't make salat and like this and then but now when it's haram, what happens? The order is given.
Follow.
Obedience. Itar. On the spot. So now, even the people who were engaged in the business of selling alcohol and producing alcohol just poured it out in the streets. Same thing for hijab. There were sahabiyat that when the mandate came to cover, some of them, they did not want to take a step without obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they sat down in the street and sent their menfolk, like, you go get me something to cover. I'm not moving until I can fulfill this amr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we're trying to address things in a very backwards way,
got it.
Like all these external actions, we want to impress upon people, how come you don't do this and how come you don't do that?
Right.
Not realizing that these are actually supposed to be the fruits, right, of this internal process that we're going through, this internal development and maturation that we're going through. Then like these things don't just come, when they come, they don't seem like a burden.
Right.
They actually, you appreciate them, you value them, right? It's not just about adherence because, well, Allah told me to. Now, initially, yeah, there's certain aspects you have to, because it's helping you to get to that point. So yes, you have to pray 5 times a day. Why? Because Allah wants us to pray 5 times a day. He needs that for some odd reason? No. Ma'adallah. Allahu ghani wa antumul fuqara. Allah is completely independent of us. He doesn't need us for anything. The whole of creation. We're the ones who are in need. So Allah Ta'ala says, you need to pray 5 times salat. I'm giving you a gift. Think about like our origins for salat. Where did it come from? Isra and Mi'raj. It's being presented to Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam during a special occasion. It's a gift. It's an advancement. It is the tool of the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam. And now it is being given to us. And it was Musa alayhi salam like, yeah, I know people. Go back. They're not going to do 50. But that 50 that was originally given to us was what? An indication of the intense need that we have of it. Not a burden, a need. There's a requirement, right, that is associated with it. So Allah Ta'ala condensed the 50 into those 5, right? And then now do this. You're going to need this to overcome and to deal with these internal factors. Why the zakat? Because you need to get over your selfishness. You need to detach from your dunya at least this minimal amount. And that's what it's about. The minimal amount necessary for us to actually engage in that process of maturation. So if we're thinking that I'm just going to perform the actions, and the actions are what's going to save me, that is khilaf al-aqidah. It is khilaf al-aqidah. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Actions are based on their intentions. So what is your motivation? Because that is what's going to count. If it's just a checkbox, okay, well, what does Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam say about treating Ramadan like a checkbox? There are those, they fast during the month of Ramadan, and the only thing they get is what? Hunger and thirst. But they fasted. The action is there. The motivation was wrong. Where does the motivation come from if not in here? So we have to address what's happening in here. And then we see the improvement in the salat. We see improvement in the fasting. We see improvement in not just like the minimal, like far as like zakat. Now, mashallah, you're making tahajjud. You're making your sunnatul mu'akkada. You're making nawafil. You're giving sadaqah, not just zakat. You're fasting outside of Ramadan, ayyamul bid, and the 13th, 14th, and 15th, and Mondays and Thursdays, right? You're not just going for hajj, you're going for umrah. You see what I mean?
Right.
So, and then all those extra aspects, the ones that are fard, they're what? Public. Because it's not just essential for you, it's essential for the environment, it's essential for the community, it's essential for the ummah, collectively, one body. But now the nawafil, private. Now that's between you and Allah. Zakat, give publicly. Sadaqah, privately. Fard salat, go to the masjid, make it publicly. The sunnah even, Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam prayed at home. Tahajjud, private. When you're fasting during Ramadan, everybody has to know you're fasting. The assumption is there that you're fasting.
Right.
Outside of Ramadan, you don't tell anybody, I'm fasting Mondays and Thursdays. You try to keep it a secret. Hajj, tell everybody, I'm leaving. Umrah, shh. I had teachers that they would just disappear. They would just disappear. Like in the middle of the academic year. They'd be gone for a week. Right? It's like, we didn't know he was leaving. And he comes back. MashaAllah.
So no need to meet everybody, say goodbye, I'm going for Umrah.
Nope.
Throw me a nice party when I come back.
That is actually the opposite of what you're supposed to do. It's the opposite. It's supposed to be private. It's supposed to be secrets between you and Allah. You're trying to protect your sincerity. You're trying to protect your motivation.
Well, that's a new one for us.
But that's what I'm explaining, right?
Yeah.
Is that we need that environment. We need that environment so that way we can actually focus on the application of these beautiful concepts.
Can Muslims then use this as an excuse? I haven't gone through tazkiyah yet, and God knows when I'm going to go through that. But for now, I'm just going to assume I'm fine. What I do is fine, my heart's clean, because it's completely subjective. Inshallah, one day tazkiyah happens and I decide to, implement the hijab and I implement the other rulings from the religion, but I have never gone through this process. And if generations go by.
If you are not, at least on a minimal level, with intent, engaged in this process of tazkiyah, because when you understand what tazkiyah is and what it means, it's not really possible. It's just not. Like, how are you going to engage in this deen when we're dealing with our nafs? Like, we have to live this life. We're dealing with our nafs, and we're dealing with shaitan, and we're dealing with our tabar, our attitude, our disposition, and we're dealing with our hawa, our desires and passions. Like, we have all of this going against us. And if we aren't at war, right? At war in ourselves, like to fight against this, that means we've already given up to the enemy. So like you said, yeah, I will be content with my own subjective perception of myself. But subhanAllah, how many people do you know that actually, like, even the ones who are depressed and anxiety still have a very high value for their own thinking? They still have a very high value for their own thinking.
Yeah.
So then, like, if you're going to function from your own thinking, okay, well, that's your delusion. And what is death if not the destroyer of delusions, destroyer of fantasies?
Yeah. Now
you have to face reality. So if somebody wants to gamble like that, because that's all it is a gamble. It's a gamble. You want to gamble your akhirah, you want to gamble your eternal existence away for what? For what benefit here?
My feeling.
See? Insecurity.
Yeah.
I need self-validation. And without it, who am I? Well, why don't you just give up self and practice this lifestyle, this deen of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and actually find out who you really are. So again, from the beginning. So I'm still learning, and I'm still trying to figure out how to put it into practice. Is it on a higher degree than from before? And alhamdulillah. But the risk of failure, like, think about it. If you fall from 50 feet, it's one thing. Fall from 50,000 feet, something totally different. Expectations at 50 feet, one thing. Expectations at 50,000 feet, something totally different. But the result of failure is basically the same.
A lot of insights here, Sheikh.
SubhanAllah.
Jazakallah khairan. I want to end with one particular question that I had in mind. When we think about Amr bin Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar, when we think about this, the way I interpret it is, it should be my job as a Muslim to convey to you something that you're doing incorrectly and potentially protect you from that harm. I see you drinking, I tell you, brother, this is not okay for you to do. That's the bare minimum responsibility I have as a Muslim. How far can we take that? And this could be anything.
So there's 3 levels, right? So there's stop it with your hand.
Yeah.
Then there's stop it with your tongue. Right? Speak out against it.
Yeah.
Then there's bare minimum is at least you have to feel bad about it in your heart.
Right.
Okay. So you got 3 different levels. Those levels, because this hadith is often misquoted and misunderstood.
Okay.
Those levels are based on your level of authority.
Yep.
Okay.
And just to close out, if you want to share something with us about Islam of mind, what you're looking to do with it, and how can we make the community aware of it as much as possible?
Yeah, everything that we just got done talking about.
Yeah.
Really without any exception. It's nothing complicated. It's real simple. Like, there are basic understandings you need of building. right? That building needs to be multi-purposed. So like whether yes, of course we need the masjid area, but then also like we want to take a holistic approach, mind, body, and soul. So like having a gym that is like set times for the men and the women, actually having like, these essential components there. For instance, we have new Muslims, they take their shahada and they're homeless, right? We have guests that come into town. So like actually having like rooms and everything set up so that like we can actually, whether we're hosting guests or people who need a temporary residence, as we help them to get on their feet, in that also we bring all of our professionals together. We've got young people that are trying to decide a course for their professional career. They need some help and advice, right? Like, mashallah, you guys are educated, experienced, and leading figures in your field. Mashallah, like this is something we can provide as a service to this next generation. So whether it's that, getting them the spiritual help that they need, sometimes they need mental health assistance. So we help them with that, help them with job placement. We need to actually help these people holistically because we need it too, right? So the effort, the understanding is we're making the effort in the community, not because the community needs us. The point of the understanding of altruism and community service in Islam is based on selflessness. So we're engaging in community service because I need to learn selflessness, not because these people need me.
Right.
They need Allah. They don't need me, but I need to learn selflessness. So I'm feeding the hungry and the poor because I need it. The first time I saw like, somebody actually thank somebody, like you're giving them food and they take the food and you're saying, thank you. You think it's supposed to be the other way around. Yeah. No, thank you. Yeah. Because you're here, you became an opportunity for me to learn selflessness. So Allah is using you in my life positively. So thank you, right? And then we need to get the financials in order as far as like, generating businesses and helping people to get into businesses and get some, independence and start their own thing so that we can like just have a certain, like whether it's right now we're using Patreon and setting up the, the memberships and everything for this point. We want to get everybody, make a monthly commitment to that environment, not the building, the idea of taqwa, the idea of an environment that we can all like personally grow and also raise our families in so that we can address issues, for instance, like education of our children, childcare, right? And so on and so forth. Right? We can tackle these issues again, based on seerah. Let's use the Deen. Let's just apply the Deen. We don't need to recreate the wheel, just apply the Deen. So really the challenge is getting those like-minded individuals together, get them over their, everybody's so jaded and like ticked off and hurt and like, okay, fine. But it's not gonna change anything. Right. It's not going to help anything. So let's get focused on like solution. Okay. And let's put something together. Ideally, me personally, I want to be close to Dar Qasim to get the benefit from experienced mentorship, and then also like that wealth of Ullama and actually like that cross thing. Because we have college towns that develop around universities all across the country, right? We need to develop an environment around Dar Qasim where Dar Qasim is, for instance, is teaching Deen, right, on a very high academic level. But once you come out of there, the focus in the community surrounding that academic institution is on practical application. Right. And that's what we need. A place and environment that's based on taqwa where we can focus on practical application.
Anybody looking for this information can find it on the website. I will put a link in the description below. Again, brothers and sisters, thank you so much. Sheikh Khalid, Jazakallah khairan for your presence here. Inshallah, I hope to talk to you again like this.
Inshallah. It'd be my pleasure. Jazakallah khairan.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.